But thank you for joining. So like I said, Tiara International, Women's Leadership Development, and Dr. Allison Miller is joining from the LA area, and Francisca is joining us from the Netherlands. So hello, you guys.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi,
Glad to
Betsy.
be here.
Yeah, me too. I had to unmute to say hi. I'll mute again.
No, we're getting better at the choreography of video and video dialogue. So today we're talking about the topic of resilience. I feel like, over the years, we've talked about this topic many different ways, whether it's with organizations navigating change and how do you do that by building resilience, whether it's one-on-one with our clients, or even we have a blog out there called Bounce Back Ability that really breaks down what resilience is and some steps you can recover. One of the reasons that I thought it was so timely today, that I'm sitting here with two of my favorite people in the world, and I think between both of you, all of the top 10 stressors that one can face has probably happened in the last 10 days. Right? I mean, Alice,
Right.
you and your family had to evacuate your home because of the fires, as well as there was a shooting in the neighborhood in which you live. And Francisca, you're dealing with moving and aging parents and business issues and family, whatever the things are. And I feel like, so if you put out one of those lists of like, what are the most stressful things that a person can go through, and it's holiday season and it's the end of the year. So one of the things that we often do with Tiara is we say, okay, what do we need in this moment? What are we experiencing? And then trusting that it's the same kind of thing that other people are experiencing. I think for myself, I've been on the road traveling way more than typical. So it's more of the day-to-day resilience that I'm going to be thinking about today, is like, how do I stay centered and build resilience and stay grounded while I'm like on the road, but still trying to be present to my friends and the holiday and closing out the year powerfully and all this stuff. So I think we have a lot we can talk about. I know, Allison, you suggested as we were prepping, starting with just defining, like, what is resilience when we talk about that. So what are your thoughts? Like when clients come to you, how do you define resilience?
Well, I always think of it as fundamentally about adaptation, because the reality is when you're in need of resilience, it means something, some kind of, serious challenge, adversity, a trauma, some kind of tragedy or significant source of stress has occurred or is occurring. And that could be, health related, in your family, some kind of relationship problem. It could be something like what happened in our community, where we woke up on a Thursday morning, actually just about a month ago, and I think it was actually on the 8th of November. We woke up in the morning to find out that there had been a mass shooting in our community. And I actually had planned to go to a candlelight vigil and was telling my husband, I'm going to go to a candlelight vigil. And within 2 hours, I said, I don't think I'm going to be going to that vigil. I think we might be evacuating.
Mm-hmm.
So I live in a town called Oak Park, California, and that's the town where the Woolsey fires started, which is there were two fires burning at the same time. The one that burned up north, just so people know, that burned down Paradise, was up north for me. Our fire that we experienced did destroy many homes. It was actually not as destructive as the Paradise fire, but we actually evacuated. We were like under mandatory evacuation. So to me, that was a trauma. At the same time, the night of the shooting, we had a new family member born in our family with a very serious heart defect, and born early. And he's actually still in the hospital. So it's been just an ongoing source of stress that we had hit us literally within 24 hours. We had all of these things occur. So I think it being resilient doesn't mean that you don't experience difficulty or stress. I mean, emotional pain and sadness and difficulties are a part of life. It's really about how do we adapt to it. And I think the good thing about resilience, and I'm definitely experiencing this in my life right now, is that it's not a trait that I have or don't have. It's really about my thoughts, my actions, and my behavior, and that we can learn to be resilient. And the good news is that actually sometimes a trauma or tragedy is what helps you cultivate your resilience in the first place.
Right. Like sometimes we do face things that if we heard them described, we would say, I don't know how I would face that, or I don't know how I would get my family through that. Like, I don't know what we would do. Yet when you are in that circumstance, not only do you face it, you do learn from it. And oftentimes it can make you stronger. But I love that you use that word adaptability. That's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you define it?
Well, I agree what you say about the word adaptability. I also really liked it that you used it, Alison. It is how to adapt, but also from what place you respond actually to the situation. And find then that space inside of yourself where you are as if you were in the center of a storm, where it's calm and clear and a storm is happening. I mean, if evacuation is coming into your field of experience, I mean, it's pretty much like a storm. But how, when big things like that happen, how can you then stay in your own center and respond to that situation from there? And that center, we in Tiara, we refer to that as your true self. So how can you come to your true self and then take an action?
Yeah, and I like that second piece you added on too, because for myself, I do often think about resilience as like, how do I keep going? Like if I'm exhausted, if I've been through something really hard, if there's a circumstances that, yeah, I faced that have been very, very challenging or unexpected. Yet it's also how I keep going that it feels like it's reflected with my value system,
Right.
self, like you said, because I know if I keep going, but I'm feeling either overwhelmed or um, uh, kind of victim-y, like that kind of thing, that for too long, like Allison, like you said, whenever there's a circumstance that you face that's hard and you're facing the unknown or something surprising happens, we have to, give ourselves room to feel angry or fear or whatever happens. And then on the other side of that, there's still life living to do.
Yeah, yeah,
And so then it's like, okay, so when you have processed whatever you can process and there's still living to do, how do you include all of the emotions in your own path of learning and stress management, yet still then move forward, but in a way that feels like you're choosing how, and it's
yeah.
responsive and it's in line with who you really want to be.
Yeah, and that moving forward is a very interesting part. I was in a yoga class this morning, and we ended the class with a 10-minute meditation about I am. So we were invited to get into the space of I am, and nothing to fear and nothing to defend, and you just am in the moment. But the moment I walked out of the yoga class and I got my bicycle, I mean, there was this flat tire and I had to go to the shopping. So there is this immediate, very creative number of triggers that that put me to a test this morning. And I think many people feel in that sort of situation that we are putting to the test. We also talk about resilience in terms of your bounce back ability. So your ability to bounce back or to reconnect with your true self. But then at times, and especially I think at these times during the holidays, there is a lot of bounce off triggers around us, which makes it particularly interesting to pause and reflect on how we are dealing with these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over time go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say that I think that one of the things that we need to recognize is that depending on what has happened, is that we actually might need a period of time where we're just a mess. I have had the chance to sit with and talk with people who lost their homes in our town, and they don't know what day of the week it is. They don't know if they're coming or going. They're completely disoriented. And if they were listening to this conversation, I'd want them to know that they really had room. Like, being able to bounce back doesn't mean you have to bounce back immediately. And that resilience is something that can happen right over time. But I do think that what I heard both of you saying is that it's like, are things happening to me, or am I finding a way for them to be happening with me? That I'm given that they have happened, right? Something really difficult is either ongoing or has already occurred. How do I work with it? And I was thinking, Francisca, as I was imagining you coming out of that yoga class, that you could shrink down into a little I, like, oh, why does this happen to me? Right?
Mm.
Or you could elevate yourself up to sort of the big I, the container who says, oh, this is something that's occurring in my space. What are my choices? And so
Mm.
somehow being able to stay connected to the idea of choice, and that may require time, a lot of support. It might require therapy or who knows what, but
Mhm.
that the idea of getting your center grit and again in a way is about, I think, being able to work with what's occurring as opposed to what you were saying, Betsy, about being victimized by it, even though you may actually have been a victim of something,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but not getting caught and stuck in that reality for too long a time.
And as I'm listening, I'm thinking about how people can practice resilience or build resilience. Like you said, it's not a characteristic. It's not like you're born resilient or not. It's something that you can build. And my mind is starting to see it in almost like three categories. Like, what can someone do proactively? Like before there is a trauma they're experiencing, to just feel like they're building resilience sort of internally so they're better prepared. And then the second is like during. So like you're saying, like when you're in the middle, what does resilience look like, or what are some things that can help you get through the hardest, most surprising time? And then after, like once that has passed, what are some ways that we build or practice resiliency over time? So if you look at it that way, what
Hmm.
do we do before, like kind of proactively, to feel like we are more resilient in general, so that when these things happen, like when you walk out and have a bike tire flat, it doesn't take over the whole day. It doesn't hijack the whole day.
Mhm.
And sometimes I feel less resilient and more resilient in those moments. So I'm just trying to think about like, what are the things that I've done? If I'm feeling pretty resilient, even in the face of like a crisis, what have I been doing that makes me feel resilient?
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah, that's
being rested, or uh,
yeah.
having practiced this whole thing of like going with the flow and letting down resistance, and being empowered in the moment in times that are pretty calm or day-to-day times. And then
Yeah.
prepared in those moments. What do you guys do proactively to build your resilience capability?
Yeah, that's a great question, Betsy. And I think what I've been doing over time is understand better and better and better ever, and still continuing to understand better about who I truly am, and also remember that. And also remember that when I get triggered, that I sort of drop out or fall out of my true self, and just quickly in a moment become a sort of coping self or a surviving self. But through that building over time and the investing on, hey, what are all those puzzle pieces that help define and who I am, it's helpful to also distinguish the clever and the coping part of me, and makes it easier to capture or put a finger on it.
Mm-hmm.
And still, I mean, it's all work in progress, so it's impossible to expect that I'm able to do that in every moment. So it's also about appreciating, it happens that you fall off the wagon, or that I fall off the wagon, that I fall out of my true self, and be compassionate with that. And that's part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
And I can take time, or Alison, as you were explaining, so sometimes it takes a bit longer. Sometimes it can go really quick, that you can turn around or bounce back, or reconnect to the true part of yourself.
Mm-hmm. So is
Well,
that that
go
on
ahead,
an
Betsy.
ongoing basis, what you do is you really tune into your true self, so you're familiar
Yeah,
with what it feels like. But then when things happen that are reactive, you're very compassionate with yourself in the moment, and
yeah.
not.
If I remember, yes. Sometimes I need other people to help me remember. I mean, in that sense, it's great to have a community
Yeah.
and have people around you who, well, who know the dynamics, yeah, in general and mine in particular. Yes.
I think that's really key, actually, having connections and community, and thinking of resilience not as just an individual phenomenon, but more of a communal phenomenon, that any one individual member in a community might be struggling more than another, and that resilience is something that's more of a web. And I think that it's part of the reason, at least in the United States, we have a real increase in the amount of depression and actual suicide or suicide attempts, because I think that's part of what that fabric is really needing to be rebuilt for a lot of people, that there's that kind of communal resilience, and that when you forget, like you said, Francisca, there are other people there to uphold you and support you. You know, as I was listening to both of you, it reminded me of something that a metaphor we used years ago in one of our teleseries on self-compassion. It was this, we were talking about how in the movie Jaws, you know, the first Jaws that came out, about this movie that Steven Spielberg made with a giant shark. Well, there's this iconic scene from the movie where Roy Scheider's character is in kind of a relatively small fishing boat, and he's standing and throwing fish over the side of the boat, and someone else is, you know, driving the boat. And Jaws appears to him for the very first time, and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he stands back up and he says to the person driving the boat, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. And that resilience, in a way, is about having the consciousness that I engage in things like practicing self-compassion, taking care of my nervous system, you know, knowing when I get stressed that I do things deliberately to soothe myself and calm myself and recenter myself, that I do build a network of people, that I work on having a hopeful outlook in life, you know, that I do things that I have goals. I remember that I've gotten through crises and difficulties in my life before. You know, I try not to see difficult things as insurmountable problems, but rather as opportunities. Those kinds of things, I think, help you build a bigger boat, so that if something does occur that's very difficult, you're not in a little tiny fishing boat, you know. And if you find yourself in that position, I think that's really a time when you've got to reach out to people in your life who might have a bigger boat, or be able to give you some extra support.
Yeah, I love that. I love the thinking of the resilience factor in your community or your network, that you're not alone in going through some of these things. And I do think that's a clear picture of you know, during times that are just normal amounts of daily stress, like nurturing your community, taking care of yourself, training your mind to focus on choices, being connected with how your true self, your value system, like we've talked about. Then when the wheels do fall off or something happens, it's like you do have a different capability. Then in that phase, when things are really traumatic, I feel like I've already heard us say, be compassionate with yourself, allow yourself to be a mess. For me, I have to get really clear about what I can and cannot do, and allow myself just to be like imperfect. Like, all I can do is this one thing today, or I actually just need to clear my calendar and sleep, or I do need to ask somebody for help or reach out and share my experience, so that I don't feel alone in it. But a lot of the in the moment stuff for me is just like allowing myself to be however I am, and just not expecting too much of myself, and having that be okay, and trusting that the greater process and my community and things like that will be there on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I think it would actually be helpful for a lot of us to start to have explicit conversations with people in our lives that we're close to, where we actually sort of make resilience agreements. In other words, I have some agreements with friends of mine that if I were to die, they would look out for my husband and children. Or if I were to become really seriously ill, like actually you have some open conversation with people in your life about how do we support each other. And I think one of the key things, and this is often difficult for successful women to do, is that when a crisis hits, the truth is people want to help. People will say, how can I help you? May I make you dinner? May I come over? And part of being resilient is actually being willing to be honest about the fact that you're vulnerable and you need help, and actually let people help you. So I think sometimes people are facing a difficulty and they don't let others help them, which is actually diminishing their own resilience.
And someone can appear resilient on the outside too. I think there's also been I don't know if it's a hashtag or a thread or a blog, that series that I was reading, but the whole thing about check on your strong friend. So the person who feels like even in time of stress that they have it all together, to try to have what you're saying, a more open and honest conversation, to be like, well, really, how's it going? And allow them to know they're supported even if they are a mess or they haven't figured it out yet or anything like that, and not just assume that people are okay, because we do put up a pretty brave front these days.
Yeah. And you know, Betsy, one of the things I learned too is that when you are in a position, one of the ways that you can support the resilience of someone who is going through a tragedy is stop trying to fix it for them, right? So when you listen to people who've lost their homes, for example, in a fire, or had something really tragic happen, it's not helpful to say to them, well, at least you have your family's intact. You know,
Right.
at least, you know, what really people are often needing is just an opportunity to be able to express
Right.
how they're actually feeling. And that kind of processing for them is what actually helps them be more resilient. So we don't need to rush in and fix things for other people when they're going through a crisis. They typically really just want someone to hear and to sort of hold space for how it is for them, what's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
So
very important.
when it's past and we're on the other side of whatever, and sometimes these traumatic experiences are a long time. Like if you do have a loved one with an illness or a child going through something, I mean, sometimes it can be something like a flat tire and it's fixed and you move on, but sometimes we have to maintain a sense of resilience in a situation that's challenging for a prolonged
Mm,
period of time. So, you know, after that initial sort of overwhelm and shock and that kind of thing, whether the incident has actually passed or you still have to manage it for a long time, what do you guys do to either learn from it or stay resilient or feel like you're building from it, as opposed to get into a downward spiral of, I don't know, feelings hopeless, I would say? What do you do?
I think one of the key things that I try to do is just choose to see it as part of kind of like a spiritual journey for myself, and to see whatever it is to say, well, I guess this is a teacher. This is a teacher for me. And, you know, and actually to look for um, how this might sound a little bit provocative to say this, but like, how is it a gift? Or what are the gifts inside of it? How is this calling on me to grow, expand, learn, see from a new point of view, and I guess adapt to the new reality that I may really not like, but I don't want to get caught in a, you know, victim mindset in connection to it.
mm.
What about you, Francisca? What do you do over time to feel like you're staying centered or building resiliency?
I I have in fact this daily practice of starting the day reconnecting to my true self, and no matter what happens, that's what I'm doing. So at first I thought, this is a great question you are asking. I really have no idea. So, but that's often with things that are then in a blind spot. And I really appreciate, Alison, what you are sharing. That really we are on a journey, and taking time, taking a moment to assess where we are on that journey, and how and where we are perhaps being challenged, and how that is part of a bigger story of ours. It brings us, or it will bring me into the area of, hey, what is life wanting from me here? We are so used to what do we want in life? What are the goals we set? What do we want to achieve? But these are moments where I think, and what does my life want from me? And those are indeed moments of reflection and learning,
Right.
and take that forward. And how do you do that, Betsy?
Yeah, I think for me, what I do after the initial emotion and everything is passed is I feel very, I always, I'm very diligent about, well, what am I going to choose to focus on? What am I going to choose to talk about? Like, there's a thing of like, it feels like almost your mind can be going a million different directions or something like that. And in those moments, you know, I get to be like kind of like almost ultra present with like what's going on in my thinking. So it's like, where do I put my attention? What do I want to focus on? What direction do I want to go? and what am I possibly making up that's not true about this situation that might make it even more horrible than it is, whether it's like, I think this means X in the future, or now nothing's ever going to be the same. Like, I try to name like what's the biggest fear maybe, and then be like, okay, so given that, what's true about the situation, where do I want to put my attention, where do I want to put my focus, and then also how can I take care of myself so that then I can be of service to whatever is happening, if it's affecting a lot of people or something. But I try to be really tuned into those components so that I don't just sort of unconsciously go down a path of making it worse than it is, or prolonging something that doesn't need to be prolonged, or putting myself last so that I also prolong the feeling of my own, unwell being, like not being well or something like that for too long. So I think probably those things. And then I do the same thing. I think we all probably do it naturally. Like, okay, so, what didn't work about that, or what did I learn, or what can I pull forward, or something. I don't want to, like, not everything has to be a big, huge meaning or a lesson. Yeah, I do think that I pretty naturally go to, okay, so how did I handle that, or what did I learn, or what can I do differently next time, or something like that, in order to feel like it's a learning process as opposed to just something that feels like it was done to me in some way. And then humor. I mean, that's another thing.
Oh yeah.
Not to be irresponsible or offensive with it, but I've been with some of my friends through some very dire circumstances. And if you can get to that place of humor in the midst of it, I mean, it really does help put things in perspective sometimes, which I think.
Absolutely. And I think for me, that's another part where I really need community and people around me, because I often forget that it's a key value, but at the same time, yeah, it disappears, right, and I'm not able to access it. So I need others to help remind me there. Yeah.
I think a really simple thing that I often do is look up at the stars and sort of look at the cosmos and have that sense of like, oh yeah, this is a temporary, like a blip on the radar, really, relative to the universe. That does help me. And I think that one of the ways that I have evolved, especially over the last year, that's been, I think, really helped me be more resilient in this last few weeks, was when I got back from the fire, I did not feel like myself. Between what's happening with our, the baby in our family, the fires, the shooting, I really didn't feel at all like myself. And I went to a meeting that our school district put on, and it was so wonderful because they talked about how after trauma or tragedy, people regress, whether you're 4 years old or 3 years old, or you're, 80 years old. And that's normal. And I think that one of the key things is acknowledging your vulnerability. And depending on your genetics, your family history, the traumas and difficulties you experienced in your life, we all have vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And when we can acknowledge that we have certain vulnerabilities and what those vulnerabilities mean for us in terms of what we need, and we can talk more honestly with people in our lives about what it is that we actually need, I think it's easier to bounce back. And I think a key thing that really helped me over the last month was I didn't beat myself up or make myself wrong for the fact that I felt like sometimes overwhelmed or really sad or just very strange. And it's also strange to feel that way when our house didn't burn down, right? I didn't personally know anyone who died in the shooting, right? Of course, I do know I know my family and I know what's happening there. But to just keep, in a way, being very tender with myself of, this is a phase of life where I'm more vulnerable right now. And I was able to actually go to my husband and say, I actually need premium fuel right now from you. I can't have regular unleaded. I need to be held. I need to be checked in with. So I need premium fuel. And he actually heard me when I framed it that way. And I think that really helped him understand how he could help me be more resilient.
Yeah. And I have had that experience too, where I don't feel like myself for certain periods of time. And it's funny because I always have a moment where I start to return to myself, and I actually, in my head, I've heard myself say before, like, "Oh, I've missed you. You know, welcome
Yeah.
back," that kind of thing. So this sort of like ebb and flow of feeling
Yeah.
not your true self, then back to your true self in order to handle what's around you. I think being present to that, and also just like we've been saying, not making that wrong. But yeah, of course, you would feel unsettled and not like yourself, and not sure where it's going to go or how to handle something you've never been through before like this, which is really incredible. So
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
admire both of you, and a lot of the women in our community in terms of when situations face them, how they dig deep and handle them with authenticity and transparency and humor and resiliency, and do what you need to do to make it to the next thing. You know, it's quite an adventure that we're on and that we've witnessed in each other. So thank you for being my role models in it in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Thank
great occasion too when you have difficulties to call on yourself to deepen your connection to your values.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's really what got me through, and what I keep thinking about with my great nephew who's so sick right now is like it's just a reminder to me to be loving, to be compassionate, and to take wise action, to slow down and center myself. That everything that's occurred, reminds me of how much I really value community and connection, and that in that way, all of these events are a teacher for me, and do help me adapt. I keep adapting one moment after the next of how can I act in alignment with my values.
Mm,
Any
yeah.
final thoughts from you, Francisca?
Yeah, I'm just super grateful that we as a team are so tuned in to each other, also to be supportive to each other. We have such high integrity to both ourselves and to each other. I wish that for many other teams as well.
Yes, same.
So thank you for that also,
Yeah, thank
Betsy.
you.
Yeah, and
And thank
Alison.
you everybody who is listening live or who might be listening to a recording. You can tune in live on Facebook. So if you like our page, you can get prompted when we're going live, typically on Fridays. And then you'll also see the recordings posted there. And then we have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to as well. Again, it's Tiara International. We focus on women's leadership development. We welcome all comments and other best practices and articles and books and things like that in the comment stream below. And we will see you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.